The Night Whispers, New York City. In the late 20th century, it wasn't just a place, it was a living, breathing force. It could feel alive with opportunity in the day and turn to something far more dangerous after dark. Under the dim light of flickering street lamps, you'd hear whispers, not the kind that carry gossip, but the kind that feel heavy, secretive, dangerous. So there's Detective Mike Codella, undercover NYPD, who knew those whispers well. In the late 1980s and 90s, he worked undercover in the city's roughest neighborhoods. Drugs, gangs, organized crime, he'd seen it all, or so he thought. What he stumbled into wasn't just crime, it was something way darker. A hidden network of people, organized, connected, and willing to commit acts so disturbing they rarely made it into the headlines, and rarely people know about it today. The city itself seemed to hold its breath in certain places. Alleyways where light didn't quite reach, basements where the air seemed colder, rooftops where meetings happened at hours when most people were asleep. This wasn't the random chaos of street crime. It felt very planned, deliberate. And sometimes when Mike followed the trail, it led him to names from some of the city's most haunting cases. And at the center of one of those trails was a boy whose face became a national symbol of fear and loss. Etan, the milk carton child whose disappearance changed the way America thought about missing kids. This was before his time. Mike wasn't even working as NYPD. It was 1979, but this kid would come to haunt him years later. It was May 25th, 1979, when 6-year-old Etan left his Soho apartment for the short walk to his school bus. It was the first time his parents let him walk alone, and he never made it. The search for Etan gripped the city. His face, blonde hair, bright smile became one of the first to appear on milk cartons worldwide. Parents across America began to realize, even in broad daylight, even in a familiar neighborhood, a child could vanish without a trace. For weeks, people combed the streets, dogs searched abandoned lots, helicopters buzzed over the city, neighbors were questioned, and suspects came and went, but no one was ever charged. Etan's case went cold, but never faded from public memory. In the years that followed, Etan became a name invoked in every time another child went missing. He was symbolic of the missing child. For a generation in New York, disappearance marked the end of an era when parents felt safe letting their kids roam the block. And for law enforcement, it was a haunting reminder of just how quickly a life could be swallowed by the city. Hey guys, real quick, if you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe, and if you can't watch now, add it to your watch later playlist. Back to the video. So Mike Codella, the undercover NYPD, talks about those years in interviews like his long sit down with Julian Dory, my buddy, and on shows where he's been asked to share the stories most people never hear. He tells it straight, a string of missing kids, often runaways, street smart and tough, but who vanish as if the city just swallowed them whole.
Had to do with Etan Pate and Son of Sam and a bunch of other stuff.
Okay.
That's the case from the missing person case.
All right, so explain this one. How'd that happen?
These weren't always cases with parents. And on the news and big search teams, many were the city's invisible kids, the ones you only notice when they're suddenly not there. Following the leads took Codella into the city's hollowed out places, basements where the lights didn't work, warehouses that echoed when you breathed, roofs where the wind sounded like whispering. These corners of the city were so dark, he found the same signs over and over. Chalk circles, ashes, strange letters, and a little altar made from broken furniture. Candles dug into the top like teeth. He recognized patterns in the markings that match old NYPD photos from the 1970s. Informants told him about adults, not teenagers, meeting in groups that felt organized. Robes, rules, tests. People had to pass to get in. He mapped everything, every building, every alleyway, every patch of wood from a circle of stones looked too neat to be random. When he laid those maps next to the places named in David Berkowitz's prison writings and interviews, the overlap didn't look like chance. It looked like a plan. If Codella was right, this wasn't a one-time scare. It was a network that outlined the headlines, a shadow that learned to move differently when people started to look. So to understand better Codella's stories, why they hit so hard, you have to remember the bigger picture. In the early 1990s, the New York's violent crime rate was high compared to today. People double locked doors and checked the backseat of their car before starting the engine. The news felt like a drumbeat. Robberies, shootings, bodies found in places you pass every day. Even though the national homicide rate peaked in 1991, and started falling later in the decade. The fear didn't vanish overnight. People still felt watched. Parents told kids to come home before the streetlights blinked on. And that kind of atmosphere, whispers about secret groups, dark meetings, and young people disappearing felt too believable. So when Codella's files filled with strange symbols and repeated locations, the city's old chills returned. It wasn't just a crime. It was a pattern that tugged at something deeper. Old stories that never truly settled. So here we go. Getting back to Etan's case. It was 1997 when Mike got the call. The voice on the other end belonged to an inmate in the New York prison system named John Lynn Tiny, known by his nickname Tiny. Tiny wasn't calling about drugs, gangs, or the usual prison gossip. He was calling about eating Pats, that he knew something, and he wanted to get his time and sentence lowered. He claimed he had seen something years earlier that connected directly to the boy's fate. Tiny was part of the Rat Pack biker gang, a crew feared not just for violence and trafficking, but for rumors of involvement in something far stranger that I'll get into.
The name of the gang is called the Rat Pack, and they were under, I think, they were under the Hells Angels, maybe the Mongols, I don't remember.
According to the whispers, the gang sometimes worked security for secluded mansions in Yonkers and Westchester. Mansions were high-end parties blurred into alleged rituals involving drugs, extreme sexual acts, and according to some, occult practices, satanic worship.
Him and his biker gang were contracted to do these, securing these locations in Yonkers and Westchester, these mansions. And in these mansions, there was satanic stuff going on, rituals, drugs, all kinds of drugs, all kinds of crazy sex, and satanic rituals.
To Mike, it sounded like kind of a far-fetched prison story he'd heard before. But Tiny spoke with clarity and specificity that made him hard to dismiss. And as Mike began to listen, details began to surface that matched things buried in New York PD case files. So here's Tiny's account of Etan's case. He said that his biker gang were hired to run security, as well as some other parts of this satanic cult in Yonkers and Westchester areas. But this mansion they attended this one night. He said some of the most powerful and wealthy people of the Northeast were there. And at this one party, he claimed that they were running, that he saw Etan. In this party specifically, there was crazy sex, drugs, and other rituals. And that when he walked into this gathering, he saw the young boy. He believed it was Etan because he saw the milk cartons and he was everywhere. And he was standing silently while several men circled him, allegedly. They weren't roughing him up or screaming. Instead, they pulled out measuring tapes, noting the length of his arms and his legs, the size of his head. It was clinical, like a grim examination. Then came the chanting, low, deliberate, rhythmic, demonic chants. The words were foreign to Tiny, but the tone was unmistakable, ceremonial. He said it was clear to him that this was part of a ritual, one that would end in a sacrifice. According to Tiny, the method was going to be stabbing. He and another man left before it happened. That decision was made so he would never put himself at the crime scene. The boy, he said, was never meant to leave that room alive. Plus, to give you some context, many criminals will never put themselves in the crime scene. If they said they saw something, they said they heard about it later that they weren't there. This is to imply that if you read between the lines, they were most likely there, but they just do not want to be convicted with the crime. Tiny would later become a high priest in this satanic cult, according to Mike. So he would level up into higher places. But there was something about what Tiny described the room, the people, the process that felt grounded. Like it wasn't something he could have invented. It was very oddly specific. So then let's look at the pieces that match. Tiny mentioned that a member of the biker gang was involved in a Son of Sam style shooting in Cypress Hill, where the victims were black. That was a detail that matched a real unsolved shooting. He also described another case of a woman connected to the cult circle, often seen in Forest Hills Park, with gang members and cult associates. This detail was this victim had died. She had a tattoo on her back, maybe of her boyfriend or a kid or some writing. And according to Tiny, was said to be used in a bloodlet ritual, which was some blood they were gonna get from her. She reportedly agreed to it, was on board. She was placed on a checkered table as the preparation began. But in a sudden turn, the biker gang's president who was there grabbed out a huge sword and instead of just cutting it, slammed the sword down on the chest, killing her.
Crashes it down on her chest.
Whether it was a moment of mercy or a display of dominance or something else entirely, they didn't know. When Mike dug into the case, the police records confirmed the president was the only person that had been questioned about this woman. He admitted knowing her, but claimed not to know what had happened. The case, like Etan's, was closed without resolution. Makes this even stranger. So Tiny's criminal record read like a laundry list of violent offenses, drugs, assaults, trafficking, and as I said, a documented history of mental health struggles. Yet inside the biker gang, he held the title of the priest. In the gang culture, that wasn't about sermons. It was about control, recruitment, and maintaining an air of mystique while also performing a very satanic and demonic behavior. Tiny said in the gang, they would often use sex, extreme taboo, and criminal as a hook to draw in new members and keep them loyal, usually things with kids. Unfortunately, despite his past, Mike found Tiny very intelligent and unsettlingly perceptive. He could describe people and places with an almost photographic memory. In 1997, after the in-person meeting and a few phone call conversations, he had heard of a certain elite gatherings. Tiny was mentioning Bohemian Grove and the Build-A-Bear group in connection to ritual sacrifices. To give you context, these groups were not even mainstream. They were never heard about until Alex Jones blew the lid years later, which added more strangeness to this Tiny and what he really knew was going on. But just as Mike was starting to pull the threads, the order came down from his chief: drop the case. No explanation. For a detective who believed every case could be solved if you dug far enough, it was a sign something or someone didn't want answers. He couldn't believe it. Another case Mike went into was the Andre Rand's investigation. So Andre Rand was a drifter and former custodian at abandoned Willowbrook State School. Rand was convicted of kidnapping 2 children in the 1980s, but investigators suspected he might have been linked to several disappearances over the years. And in Andre Rand's case, the victims were often children with disabilities or mental health challenges, those least likely to fight back or draw immediate attention, unfortunately. The Willowbrook grounds were littered with strange graffiti and symbols that matched markings from other suspected ritual sites. Locals whispered about gatherings in the woods, fire burning at odd hours, figures moving between the trees, and so forth, adding more credit to what Tiny was claiming about these satanic groups. Some investigators thought Rand was part of a large group. Mike couldn't help but notice the overlap between Rand's suspected hunting grounds and the broader network Tiny had described. And this leads us to the most famous and inevitable one, which is David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam case. In 1976 and 77, Berkowitz killed 6 and wounded 8 in a string of shootings that terrorized New York. At his arrest, he claimed a neighbor's dog, Sam, told him to kill. It was a story so bizarre that the public wrote him off as a lone lunatic. But years later, Berkowitz recanted those statements. He said the dog story was just a cover. In truth, he claimed he was part of a satanic cult and hadn't acted alone. He named others, described ritual gatherings, and even connected them to locations in Yonkers and Westchester, the same areas where Tiny said bike gangs were guarding mansions for occult events. For Mike, it was another piece of the puzzle. Ian Patz, Andre Rand, Son of Sam, all different cases, all pointing towards the same shadows. So look at the bigger picture here. When you map it out and you look at the 90s and 70s and all these cases, you have 1979, Ian Patz disappears. Then you have in 1976-77, the Son of Sam killings. Berkowitz later claims cult's involvement. So that's happening in the first 2 years. Then you get 1980s, Andre Rand operates Staten Island with similar conclusions. And then in the 1990s, you hear about the rumors of bike gangs, working security, ritual mansions in Yonkers and Westchester. And then in 1979, you have Tiny connects all these threads in one story. And let's take it one step further, what's going on in the news today. You also have in the 90s, at the same time, you have the release of a movie by Stanley Kubrick, which is called Eyes Wide Shut, which is about these rituals taking place in the Northeast of these satanic ceremonies, which is odd, a Hollywood film about it. But, let's not draw too much of a conclusion from that, but that should be mentioned. And then, of course, what's most notable in the news today, the person most famous for trafficking in minors, is you have Epstein, the rise of Epstein in the 90s, being in the Northeast, New York, flying all over the place, private island. But all through the 90s, that's when he gets his wealth, becomes very powerful, him and Ghislaine, and that's when they're messing around with young kids. All this is in the context of the bigger picture, what was happening in the 90s, which adds more questions than answers. So the people change, the crimes differ, but the pattern remains. And it has to do with this idea of good and evil and this prevalence of worshiping of satanic people. It's bizarre, it's strange, but why? What does this mean? What does this add to? It's talking about vulnerable victims, isolated locations, symbols, and rituals that appear across decades. It's not a Hollywood film, even though they made one, Eyes Wide Shut. This is real. And every time someone like Mike Codella gets close, the case got shut down. He'd heard about this. Tiny was given this information, ended up becoming a priest, like I mentioned with the game. But like I said, Mike's case, oddly enough, got shut down by his chief, even after never believing cases can be closed. He says it on the Julian Dory podcast, which I'll let you hear right here.
We made a appointment to go see him, and the bosses on the PD told me not to go. I made appointments again, kind of on the QT, and they found out and they told me again not to go. And basically that's where the case died.
All right, now let's return to the son of Sam and get on a brighter note, despite all these killings, who was allegedly working with a satanic cult. Years after he was locked away, David Berkowitz started using a new name for himself, Son of Hope, and people forget this. He told his story as a man who found his faith behind bars, believing in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. He found prison ministries, wrote journals, and sent letters that sounded like someone trying to make peace in a place where sun hardly reaches. He said he regretted everything, and of course a lot of prisoners will do this, but it's nice to think that this man, even as he was talking of doing these horrible things, was now talking about hope, and he gave warnings. He said the group he once ran with didn't vanish when the handcuffs closed. He said it had been people in more than one state. He said it knew how to hide. In one quiet line, he wrote that even when you walk in the light, the shadow can follow.
I was chanting the names of Lucifer over and over, and I was calling out to him. I said, son of the morning, and prince, my Lord, come into me right now, take control of this vessel. And I felt like I was being emptied of my own personality, and that something else somehow was coming in.
For people like Codella, that wasn't poetry. That was a map with no labels. Did Berkowitz tell the whole truth? Some say he was exaggerating to keep his name alive. Others say he was finally telling what he couldn't say in the 1977. Either way, his words fit what Codella saw. Not a giant monster that covers the whole country, just a clever one that knows how to live in the spaces no one checks. So, was it really a network in New York that stretched from Yonkers Park to Staten Island Woods to city basement where street kids went missing? Codella can tell you what he found. Rooms that felt planned, markings that repeated, witnesses who whispered the same details, and case files that got colder after someone upstairs made a call. He stops where the evidence stops, but he doesn't forget what he saw. Berkowitz, from his cell, pointed at a shape in the dark and said it was bigger than anyone thought. Journalists and skeptics have pushed back hard, saying the claims go too far, that the jump from one man's gun to a whole secret army is too wide. They may be right about the giant army, but that doesn't erase the rooms.
I feel I was really traumatized by demons since I was a child. And I've gotten so much evidence of this over the years. After I became a Christian, I didn't understand it back then, but the Lord opened up my eyes years later to see all of these different events that kind of gelled together to cause this to happen. And I always had a fascination with the darkness.
Maybe the truth lives in the space between not a massive machine, but a stubborn stain, smaller circles that share a playbook, copy the signs, and choose targets no one wants to count. Today, many of the places Codella walked have been cleaned up. New doors, new lights, new families walking, talking weekend photos under marble arches, but not every corner is bright. The city still has rooms that are too quiet and buildings no one remembers to lock. There are still kids who slip between couches, who switch phones every week, who nobody knows to look for unless it's too late. Online, a person can find a group in a minute. People praise, hurt, and dress it up as a courage or as power or as truth. A handful of those voices will drift off and grow up. Another handful will keep going until a real-world room looks like their screen. In recent years, the cyber-enabled nightmare of the sextortion network known as 764, a decentralized neo-Nazi-affiliated satanic extremist group, has brought occult-tinged criminality into stark relief, operating largely through encrypted platforms like Discord and Telegram. Its members prey on vulnerable minors worldwide, coercing them into extreme self-harm and animal cruelty, and the production of graphic content. In 2025 alone, dozens of individuals across US, Europe, and Brazil and beyond have been arrested for participating in child exploitation, snuff plot planning, and the attempted staging of a child sacrifice at a concert. The FBI classifies 764 as a terrorist threat, reflecting the deadly seriousness of this new breed of digital occultism. So now that you've gotten the story, imagine you're walking past a park at night, you see candles between the trees, the way points of light appear and vanish when the wind turns. You tell yourself it's a photo shoot or college kids being dramatic, but your stomach tightens anyway. Somewhere nearby, a branch snaps. Someone behind you, a shoe, scuffs the path. The son of Sam is locked away. The names we've said tonight are in old ledgers and on faded case cards. The janitor who once haunted the Staten Island woods won't be walking free. But what they showed us, that a city can hold two worlds at once, is still true. In the spaces where lamplights doesn't reach, a circle can form and disappear in the time it takes you to blink. Evil doesn't retire, it changes clothes. It learns the map better than we do. And while you may never see the circle gather, the circle might already see you. My name's Alessi, and thanks for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. I appreciate each and every one of you. And I hope this gives you time to open up your Bible, read into the good word, and despite there being evil, knowing there is good, and that we know how this story ends. I will see you in the next one.